Okay, hello Nanog, I'm Fernando Frediani, I'm an engineer and I have been working for the past decades managing engineering, infrastructure and technology in telecom and in internet industry. So I'm going to talk a bit today about like practical ways that you can reduce IPv4 usage. In times of scarcity, it's always important to be conscious of the IPv4 that you have available for your organization because you're not going to get much more. So you should better think how to use it in a more optimized way. So I'm going to show you a few different scenarios where I was able with the projects and things that I worked to how to optimize this usage. So the first scenario I want to talk about is CGNAT. If you are a broadband provider, you can save a lot of public IPv4 without degrading or changing the way you serve your customers. So the scenario I want to show here is a scenario where we had 4 different CGNAT equipment and 4 different BNG for PPPoE concentrators. So as they are smaller box, you need more IPv4 for each one of these CGNAT boxes. Then you spend more IPv4 to serve the same customer base. So after that, we moved to a more concentrated scenario with 2 more capable equipment for doing these translations. So you require less IPv4 to serve the same customer base. So you keep the same amount of customer concentrators and you have less IP. So in this scenario, we were able to reduce the usage of necessary IPv4 to 50%. That's a lot. It's a lot of IPs that you can save for expanding your CGNAT where you need or to serve other corporate customers. So reducing the amount of IPv4 necessary to the same customer base doesn't necessarily mean that you have to degrade the service. And one key point of this is to make usage of something that I call kind of like a magic, it's book port allocation. Many providers I see that do fixed CGNAT and that locks you to an amount of IPs that you must have available there. With book port allocation, you have a lot of flexibility and you gain a lot on saving IPv4. And the only thing that you need to do is store the logs. Many people get afraid of storing the logs for CGNAT, but it's not a big deal. It's quite a simple thing. So this is one way that we are able to reduce quite significantly the amount of IPv4 used. And this graph shows something interesting, which is the amount of blocks. So when you use CGNAT for book port allocation, you have to define a certain amount of ports that you allocate per customer at minimum. So for example, we defined 512 ports for each block and then up to 8 maximum blocks. And then as you can see on the graph, like the vast majority of customers in this example, over 31,000 customers, they were allocated only 1 block. So that means that you can do a lot with the same amount of IP addresses, different from a fixed NAT. And the green line is this 31,000. The red line is the amount of possible blocks that can be allocated for that amount of public IP addresses. So in that scenario that I showed with 2 more capable, more capacity equipment, you can safely have the failover scenario where even if one equipment fails, the amount of ports used for that remaining public IPv4 is still enough to serve that customer base. So you are good even with a redundancy scenario because you were able to save a lot by using book port allocation. The second scenario I want to talk about is something that might sound obvious to many, but I see a lot of people still using /30s to point links, and there's no reason anymore to do this for the past 20 years. We have our RFC that's 20 years old that shows you that you can use /31, so you don't need a broadcast and a network address. So that's my goals are not to many, and people are just used to use /30. So stop using /30, just use /31, and don't be afraid of that, because it works on all major vendors. I have these on several companies that I worked, and it just works without any problem, without any concern. You just build a policy, internal policy on your company that you will allocate /31 to any point-to-point links, anyone really. There's no restrictions, so no afraid. Like sometimes I ask people, like, why do you still use /30? Because there's no reason. Is it to have good luck, or I don't know. So just standardize your process, your internal usage for public IPv4 for point-to-point. So train your technical staff, your sales staff to know how to deal about that, how to explain customers that's the same thing, and adjust your marketing material, your sales material. Instead of mentioning that you will issue the customer for the connection is /30, just say, I'm going to give you one public IP address. So it's the same thing, instead of mentioning specifically /30. And inside your backbone as well, use /31 for point-to-point links, even with private addresses. And that's not about saving private IP addresses, but again, it's standardization for your process, for your team. Everybody can eat your own dog food. So if you are offering to a customer that you're going to connect to him as with a /31, you should use on your backbone, and all your team should be synced about that. So, and if you have any exceptions, anything that might put in danger some business that you might get, you can just leave with the technical team to evaluate the exceptions. That will be probably few. Like from many cases that I had just one case that we had to do an exception, a single one. So you can just use /31 for everything. The other thing that might sound a bit tricky is how to educate customers to do more with fewer IP addresses. I know that sometimes customers come to us with requirements. I need a /24 or even /27, which is quite a lot sometimes. And the reality is that they don't need that much of IP addresses. They just ask to see if they get, but you can try to educate and help them. There are many techniques, depending what type of provider you are. And like vHost, port forward, CGNAT, and sometimes if you are a server infrastructure provider, not every server needs a public IPv4 to do their job. They don't need to face the internet. So there are many ways that you can educate and help your customers to understand that they can do a lot with fewer IP addresses, though that saves your IP addresses as well. And if you are a broadband provider, like a smaller broadband provider, and you're not even an autonomous system, if you get /29 or /27 from your upstream, you can still do a lot with that, with a well-designed CGNAT, especially for broadband providers. And then you can get some revenue and then transfer some block later on, at a later moment. And not less important, the usage of IPv6 in all these scenarios critical to that, especially on the CGNAT, because if you don't have IPv6 along with your CGNAT, you will use a lot more of blocks allocated, and therefore you use more IPv4 from your pool. So if you have IPv6, the traffic will just go to the natural way. It's not going to pass through the bottleneck that sometimes is the CGNAT. So take it very seriously, especially for broadband, but not only. You can adopt this for any scenarios, for hosting providers and server providers, and then you can save a lot of IPv4, and then you can at least delay the time you need to transfer a new block, or even worse, to lease, which is never a good thing. So you can avoid that and do more with the IPs that you have. Thank you.